our week-long focus on the DPRK issue, we'll be discussing the latest military parade in Pyongyang a week ago and asking what extra security it thinks it needs from possessing a nuclear arsenal. And with World Book Day fast approaching, we'll look at the growing popularity of Chinese fantasy novels and how they are being received in the West. Welcome to The Point. I'm Liu Xin. To start things off, just days before the first round of the French presidential election vote this Sunday, a police officer has been murdered and 2 more wounded after a gunman shot at a stationary police car in Paris's Champs-Élysées Boulevard at around 9 p.m. on Thursday local time in an attack claimed by the Islamic State. The shooting came as the 11 candidates standing in Sunday's closely fought presidential election were engaged in a final TV appearance to make their pitches. It prompted calls for the campaigning to be suspended, and presidential candidate François Fillon confirmed he would cancel the campaign events he had been planning for Friday. Far-right candidate Marine Le Pen said the nightmare is starting again and called for measures to tackle Islamic terrorism, calling on the French people to have courage and determination to defend their country. At an earlier rally in Paris, she had already said she would call for a moratorium on all legal immigration to stop the frenzy that was dragging everyone down. After that, she said France would introduce much more drastic rules on immigration. Left-wing daily Libération called it one of the most hardline speeches of her campaign. About a third of French voters are still undecided, opinion polls suggest, making it one of the most unpredictable elections in decades. Now, whether the attack will give many of these undecided voters reason to vote for the far right is the question many are asking. U.S. President Donald Trump, who has churned out a similar rhetoric on immigration, also predicts the Paris attack will have a big effect on the upcoming presidential election. We'll all have to be keeping an eye open for what is likely to happen after Sunday's vote. As tensions in the Korean Peninsula are everlasting, our discussions on the DPRK issue continue. On August the 6th, 1945, an American bomber dropped a 5-ton nuclear bomb over the Japanese city of Hiroshima, and 3 days later, another bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. According to the Japanese government, these 2 blasts killed over 120,000 people immediately and made the U.S. the first and only nation to have used atomic weaponry in history. Realizing the tremendous and horrifying power of this weapon that could wipe out everything on Earth, a total of 191 states joined the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, or NPT, so as to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and technology. The DPRK, which withdrew from the NPT, is still barred by the treaty from making nuclear weapons. Nevertheless, none of the international efforts in the past years has successfully stopped the DPRK's attempts. For more on this issue, I'm joined from Washington, D.C. by Alexandra Bell, Senior Policy Director at the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation, and here in Beijing, Professor Chun Ki-yu, visiting professor from the prestigious Tsinghua University, who was in Pyongyang to watch the DPRK's latest military parade. Thank you very much for joining our program. Professor Chung, let me come to you first. Now, as I said, you were at the military parade on April the 15th, which was held to honor the 105th anniversary of the birth of Kim Il-sung. What kind of weaponry were on display during the parade, and what impressed you the most?
Other than the weaponry systems, I think that like most of the world and everybody in the same shoes, they're watching what kind of the ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, the weaponry system will be shown. The Pyongyang government, as expected, presented the recent newly developed new type of ICBM, the weaponry system, as everybody had watched on TV or like me sitting there in front of the military parade. My impression, unlike most other the Western or the global the observation I rather became calm and began to bring up more fashioned idea about the 70 years long the DPRK USA or the US-Korea confrontation history might most likely come to an end within not too far down the road.
What is the reason behind your statement just now? Why do you think that is possible?
The Trump administration, even if it's still struggling with its own administration to figure out what to do with the DPRK or with Syria or the Russia or China, it seems they are now ready to present what they have in mind. They call it maximum the pressure and engagement. I would rather focus on the rather part of the quote-unquote engagement policy. There are only two options left in U.S. and Korea relations, which is the one, war, and the other is a peace, if not the war. As Tillerson and the Trump and everybody in the U.S. administration at the moment, the emphasizing, including the National Security Advisor McMaster, there won't be any military action or military option is not on the table. Then what? The peace.
Ms. Bell, let me come to you. What is your reaction to what Mr. Chung had just said? Is that your observation from Washington, D.C. as well?
First, thanks so much for having me. I do agree that we hope to find a diplomatic solution to the issue on North Korea. North Korea has continually moved forward to develop a nuclear weapons capability and long-range delivery capabilities. That presents a threat to the region and a threat to the world. The best thing to do now is to enforce and implement the sanctions that are in place, and China, the United States, and the international community should be looking for diplomatic and economic pressures that can bring North Korea back to the negotiating table to roll back and then dismantle its nuclear weapons program.
Professor Chung, how do you look at the DPRK's assertion that it needs nuclear weapons when it already possesses a lot of conventional weapons and sometimes quite advanced one? With Seoul, for instance, so close by, Pyongyang could already make a huge amount of damage with these conventional weapons.
The Mike Whitney, well-known the economist, now residing in the state of Washington, well-known writer around the world, the last 3-4 days, two most recent articles. The article title was "The Problem is Washington, Not North Korea." The next day he came up with the article, "The U.S. pushed North Korea develop the nukes, yes or no?" And I think that even the U.S. government now, the Trump administration, starting from the Trump, the Tillerson, McMaster, and the James Mattis and the top leadership acknowledged, no matter what the U.S. has done the last 30 some years, everything has failed. And again, back to the point, the issue of the peace, what the message the DPRK leadership sent to the Washington was, let's sit and find a way to bring about the peace regime, meaning concluding the peace treaty by replacing the armistice agreement, which has not been concluded until this day for 64 years. I think the time is coming that the Northeast Asia and the Korean Peninsula may face a new wave of the dialogue and engagement rather than the fighting or the conflict or the threatening with the nuclear weapons, etc.
Ms. Bell, we haven't really heard the Trump administration talk so much about this aspect of things, that is the peace mechanism, or how to come up with a peace treaty to formally end the Korean War, which is only kind of stalled by an armistice agreement. What is the kind of discussion going on in Washington, D.C. concerning this aspect, if there is at all?
Not a lot at this point, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that President Trump has yet to fill out a leadership team on national security in the Departments of Defense or Departments of State. We do not have ambassadors in South Korea or Japan or China as of yet. And I think that kind of a discussion can only happen with a full national security team in place.
Do you think that is a very important piece of the puzzle in order to achieve the goal of denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula?
Absolutely. The hard technical work that would have to go into any sort of agreement with the North Koreans is going to be done by the Department of State, by the Department of Defense. You need experts in place, and you need leaders directing those experts who have a clear and consistent idea of what the U.S. goal is.
Professor Chung, go ahead. You wanted to add.
The issue is very simple. If and when U.S. stops its aggressive or the DPRK policy as it has kept the last 70 years, then the peace will arrive. The North, the DPRK, through their military parade, as I believe it, as their political message, no matter what you have done to us, or no matter what you have done, including economic sanctions, the military, the nuclear, the war threats, it hasn't worked out. And now only two options on the table, war or peace. What I said in the beginning, I believe the U.S. is about to ready. As of yesterday, the Leon Panetta and the William Perry and all the previous, the State Department, the Pentagon and the CIA major figures all called for dialogue and engagement, not anymore the war talk, warmongering, the acts from the Washington.
Well, that would be good if that is the message. However, we are also hearing, for instance, on Wednesday, the U.S. Secretary of State Tillerson said that the U.S. was considering relisting the DPRK as a state sponsor of terrorism. Ms. Bell, why do you think Tillerson came out to make this kind of a speech, and what difference do you think it would make in practice if it is, if the DPRK is indeed relisted as such?
I don't think that would do anything to help the situation. It's unclear why that was a focus point when our top concern should be the continued missile testing and nuclear weapons testing. It's important to remember that North Korea is the only country in the world in this century that has been testing nuclear weapons. The question is why. I agree that we should be looking for diplomatic solutions, but that also involves North Korea stopping aggressive posturing and testing programs.
They say the same thing. If U.S. stops its aggressive and very the direct threat, even the decapitation of the leadership of the North, with the annual, throughout the year, the very aggressive nuclear war games within the Korean Peninsula will not help
so it's a
the
stalemate.
situation ever.
So it's a stalemate we're looking
agree.
at. Yeah. What could possibly be the way out?
On the question of the sponsor of terrorism,
yes.
I like the question, whom call the sponsor of terrorism? Even Trump, even the former, the Michael, the Flint, the former, the security advisor who was already ousted from the position, they questioned who was behind the Islamic State. And the Trump and the Michael Flint challenged it was Obama and Hillary was behind. I mean, whom you are the sponsor of terrorism? So we need to actually go back to the major real issues, not creating any more the confusion and the demonizing of a state, the independent country who only crime they have done, the DPRK, to the U.S. and the world is to challenge American power. That's the only crime they have done last 60-some years.
Ms. Bell, do you want to really quickly respond to that? But 20 seconds if you want.
Well, again, I think we should remember that North Korea was a party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It took obligations onto itself to not develop a nuclear weapons capability, and then it abandoned that commitment to the international community. So I don't think that North Korea has no blame in the situation that exists. I do agree that all parties should be looking to de-escalate the
Yes.
tensions
Yeah. Well,
and look for ways to get back to the negotiating table.
Yes.
Sure, in Chinese we say it took two hands to make a clap, right? At this moment, it also took efforts from all sides to de-escalate the situation. Thank you very much, Alexandra Bell, joining us from Washington, D.C., and Mr. Chong Qiu joining us from Beijing. And
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And
Thank
now
you.
this is my take on the situation. That's it for our week-long focus on the DPRK issue. But the tensions continue, and I'm sure the discussions will too continue in the weeks ahead, especially as we await the April 25th celebrations of the founding of the DPRK's army. China has made its position loud and clear. It is resolutely opposed to a nuclearized Korean peninsula and insists on peaceful means to achieve that. As China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi said, whoever brings war to the Korean peninsula will also have to shoulder the historic responsibility and pay a corresponding price. We'll continue to keep a close watch. To a much softer topic, April 23rd designated World Book Day in 1995 by UNESCO. Chinese writers have been attracting attention from book lovers around the world for the past few years. In 2014, 93-year-old Professor Xu Yuanchong became the first Asian winner of the Aurora Borealis Prize, the world's top prize for translation. Xu has dedicated himself to translating traditional Chinese literary works into English and French, or vice versa. Chinese science fiction authors also won the Hugo Award for Best Novel for the past 2 years. The Hugo Award is referred to as the Nobel Prize of the science fiction world. And Cao Wenxuan became the first Chinese authored Hans Christian Andersen Award for children's literature. Through translation, Western readers can now appreciate not only classic Chinese literature, but also more modern works, even the trending Chinese online fantasy novels. What are the challenges and rewards for the translators, and what role they have played in making foreign books accessible to Chinese readers and vice versa? I'm joined by two translators, Lai Jingping, popularly known as RWX, who is the founder of the website Wuxia World, an influential platform translating Chinese fantasy novels into English, and Zhang Yaling, a lecturer at China Foreign Affairs University, who translated Twilight, the famous novel by Stephanie Meyer, into Chinese. So thank you very much to both of you for joining our show. Let me come to you two first, Mr. Lai. Your pen name is RWX. It comes from a character in the Chinese martial arts book, and you also translated many fantasy novels. How would you best describe Chinese fantasy novels? Do they differ significantly from Western fantasy?
Right. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show, Shane. I really appreciate it. I think one of the reasons why these novels right now have attracted such an audience is because they have a lot of similarities to Western fantasy novels, but they're been wrapped in a sort of a Chinese skin, so to speak. It's been reskinned in a way that makes it very fresh and appealing, yet not too foreign. Like when we first translated almost 10 years ago the traditional wuxia novels by Jin Yong and Gu Long, these are novels that I loved, but then we didn't get a lot of views. But these days we're getting much more, and I think that's because Chinese fantasy web novels, they really resonate a lot more with with the popular culture than some of the more Chinese stuff that we've worked on in the past.
Ms. Zhang, now the Twilight has a huge following in China because your version is the only version so far that a huge number of Chinese people can get access to at this moment. What prompted you to take up this book when you were 26-year-old?
Okay, thank you for having me here. The Twilight Saga, the target audience is the teenagers, so it is quite easy for them to take in the Western trendy vampire culture. And I was 26 when I was translating the book. I was much younger at that time, and just one day my classmate came to me and asked me whether I'm interested in translating a novel. Then I said yes, and then it became a very popular one. I never expected that actually at the very beginning, and I was attracted to that story, to love story, and I think it is also appeal to the teenagers in our country.
I mean, to both of you, have you imagined the kind of feedback that you would have received? For instance, Mr. Lai, it is reported that your website has 3.5 million views a day. I heard some people even have donated money to encourage you to update your work more quickly, and the fact that you are on our show today make you miss one of your upload. Did you ever expect that Chinese fantasy novels would prove so popular abroad?
Well, actually, first of all, the 3.5 is a bit of an old number. We're up to around 5.2 to 5.5 million now.
Okay.
So we've still been growing. No, I mean, it's been an absolutely shocking to, I think, to all of us. I mean, again, when we first started translating a lot of traditional novels 10 years ago, if we had like maybe 50 to 100 viewers for each chapter we put up, we would be ecstatic. We would be so happy. So for us to now have hundreds of thousands of people coming every single day and doing millions of page views, it still boggles my mind, and I'm blessed to have a chance to get involved in this.
Ms. Zhang, did you also expect the kind of feedback from your translation? What are people telling you now that they know that you are the one who put these English words into Chinese for them?
I think one of the most impressive feedback is actually from my student. You know, I taught a course of translation last year, and one of my students wrote to me saying that she read Twilight Saga while she was a high school student, and she liked it very much. And she told me that she wanted to translate this kind of novel in the future. That's why she chose translation as her major. I think what you do can actually inspire people around you to do something similar and something meaningful. I think that's one of the most important reward for a translator.
Mr. Lai, how are the Chinese web novels received by foreign readers compared with the classical Chinese novels of the older times, for instance, Journey to the West or all of these books that are known to be coming from China?
Right. Well, I mean, I think the numbers don't lie. Whether we're talking about the oldest stuff, such as the Journey to the West, the Three Kingdoms, or even the somewhat newer stuff like stuff by Jin Yong, the numbers we're seeing right now on Wuxia World, it just blows everything away. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of that is because a lot of these current fantasy novels, they draw heavily upon Western games, Western movies. For example, one of our most popular novels for a time, Tales of Demons and Gods, Yao Shen Ji, it had concepts such as capturing monsters and then mixing them together and making them level up. I mean, this is stuff that's really, it's from stuff like Pokemon, it's from stuff like World of Warcraft. So it's a lot of stuff that, it's already a shared culture, a shared gamer culture, a shared anime culture. And what we're doing is, what the Chinese market has done is they've made it their own. They've taken this really good stuff and they've wrapped it in, Chinese culture, like my translation, Desolate Era, has Chinese figures like Suputi, Sun Wukong, Hou Yi. And, so it takes a really old stuff, but wraps it in a fresh way, but also in a way which is really resonating with the readers in the West, because it comes from a lot of the same source material, a lot of the same games, a lot of the same anime.
But that part of it obviously made your work easy, but what about the difficult part? What is the most difficult thing you find in your work?
The most difficult part, obviously, is the actual translation. The toughest part, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but when you're doing fantasy translation, you're working with things that don't exist. So a lot of times when you're going from Chinese to English, you really have to make up brand new English words that didn't exist in the past. So
Like
it's
what?
really a testing. They have all sorts of these random fantasy
Golems,
creatures,
for instance?
and no, that stuff's easy. But like, for example, you will have these random dragons like with a 3 or 4 part names, and then you're trying to make it sound pithy, make it sound cool in English.
Yeah.
And it's really hard. That's the hardest part. Translating is easy. Translating and making it sound good, that's really the hard part.
Ms. Zhang,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
do you find a similar problem?
Yes, I totally agree with him, right. When I translate Twilight, I think the most difficult part is to translate those magic words, like the magic used by the vampires. So how to make them also sound also magic in Chinese, I think that is a really tough work.
Okay, finally, Sunday will be World Book Day. So if you were to recommend one book to our audience, which one would you recommend? Your own works.
Yes. Twilight.
Twilight? Yeah, Mr. Lai.
Well, I mean, on my side, if we're talking web novels, my translation of Coiling Dragon is not recommended by me, but it's recommended by a lot of the readers because it's a complete book. It's got 800 chapters, and we have, it's a book where a lot of the concepts and the names are all, Western names to begin with. They had Lin Lei, Linli, or you had Baruch. So you have names that are really Western to begin with, and that just makes it really easy for Western readers to get into it. Because the name, it makes people resonate with the characters and care about the characters when you can actually remember their names. Okay. So a lot of my readers recommend Coiling Dragon. There's a lot of good stuff out there. Just go read, guys.
Okay, Coiling Dragon or Twilight. Thank you very much, Ms. Zhang Yaling, a lecturer at the China Foreign Affairs University, and RWX, founder of the website Wuxia World. And here is
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Here is my last point. Two translators, one working from Chinese into English, the other from English to Chinese. They're different processes, but both perform a similar role. You need to be equally good in both languages to be able to do this job well. Actually, I studied English language and literature when I was at university, and I've always had a special regard for literary work. But because of my job, I find myself talking in the simplest language about things that are not at all fancy or romantic. This discussion just makes me want to go home and bury myself once again into a nice book. And as is the weekend coming up, maybe you'll be doing that too? That's all for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. You can watch our live show by downloading the CGTN Live application. You can watch our previous shows on the CGTN channel of YouTube. Click on the playlist and look for The Point with Liu Xin. Thanks for watching. See you again on Monday.